Imagine waking up one morning, thinking your life is finally starting to make sense, and then discovering that the man you trusted most had been hiding something from you all along. Not just a white lie whispered in a moment of panic, not a forgotten truth brushed under the rug to protect someone's feelings, but a deliberate choice, repeated year after year, to erase a piece of your story as if it never existed at all. My name is Lauren. I'm 32 years old, live in Santa Barbara, work in design consulting, and until a few months ago, I believed my stepfather Richard was the only man who had ever truly cared about me, the only person who'd chosen me, stayed, and made me feel seen even when I didn't have the words to ask for it. He raised me after my mother vanished, and I do mean vanished, one afternoon like a ghost dissolving in sunlight, leaving behind a coffee cup on the counter, a half-folded towel in the bathroom, and a silence that seeped into the walls of the house and stayed there long after her perfume faded. He taught me how to drive in the empty grocery store parking lot on Sunday mornings before the sun came up, helped me fill out college applications while I cried over rejections I hadn't even received yet, cheered at my graduation in a wrinkled suit because he'd come straight from a shift he hadn't wanted to miss, and walked me down the aisle when I married too young and too blind, and then stood by me again when it all fell apart less than 2 years later. He was never dramatic, never demanding, never the kind of man who forced his presence into a room. Just steady, the kind of man who built his life on routine, whose coffee tasted the same every morning because he measured it with the precision of someone who needed a ritual to feel grounded, who ironed his shirts even if he wasn't leaving the house because order was comfort, who remembered my dentist appointments without needing a calendar and texted me every New Year's Eve with "proud of you" because he knew I needed to hear it more than once a year. I used to think he was my anchor, the unshakable part of a life that otherwise moved too fast and changed too often. Now I think he was my illusion, and maybe that hurts more. And it all started with a box in the attic. It was supposed to be a weekend trip, one night, maybe two, to help him pack up the house. He was ready to move, finally, after almost 3 decades in that split-level ranch on Golden Oak Drive with its crooked mailbox, perpetually stuck screen door, and the creaky floorboard by the hallway light switch that had always made the house feel like it sighed whenever you turned the lights on. Said it was time to get closer to the coast, something quieter, flatter, fewer stairs, less lawn, fewer reminders of the years that had passed like pages torn out of a book he no longer wanted to reread. I arrived Friday evening, wine in hand, expecting dust and nostalgia, maybe a few tears when we found something that belonged to Mom, a scarf, a photo, one of her old recipes scribbled in the margins of a magazine, but nothing I couldn't handle. Instead, I found history, mine, his, and someone else's I never knew existed. His living room hadn't changed since high school. Same faded plaid couch that was once new but now sagged in the middle like it had exhaled too many secrets. Same beige carpet with a stubborn stain from the time I spilled hot chocolate and tried to cover it with a magazine. And the same bookshelf full of titles he never read but refused to give away because one day I'll get to them. The faint scent of wood polish and the eucalyptus candles he always bought in bulk, even though he said he didn't care about candles, hung in the air like memory's version of wallpaper. We ordered Chinese takeout, joked about how the porch light never worked unless it rained, a mystery that remained unsolved for over 20 years, and mapped out which boxes were going where like it was some kind of ceremonial goodbye. Saturday morning, we climbed into the attic. It was warmer than I remembered. Sunlight poured through the dusty side vent, catching motes in midair like slow-floating secrets that didn't want to be found. I pulled my hair into a bun, rolled up my sleeves, and started lifting boxes down. Christmas ornaments wrapped in yellowed newspaper. My mother's wedding dress sealed in a plastic bag that made it look like a ghost in storage. A stack of yearbooks with awkward signatures and inside jokes I barely remembered. Photo albums, lots of them, from birthdays and holidays and lazy Sundays in the backyard. We laughed at pictures of me in braces, with too-thin eyebrows, tragic prom dresses, and the one photo where my bangs were so crooked we both had to stop and catch our breath from laughing. Richard kept pausing to stare at the photos longer than I expected, especially the ones with my mom. He didn't say much. Just smiled faintly, like the act of remembering physically hurt and then moved on. Around midday, I found the black box. It was wedged behind a roll of insulation, hidden so well I almost missed it, like it had been buried intentionally, like someone had hoped it would stay undiscovered until time made it irrelevant. Dust-covered, tied with an old ribbon, not festive, not decorative, functional, as if someone didn't want it opening accidentally. I pulled it out, sat cross-legged, and untied the knot. Inside, there were letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to me. Different cities on the return labels. Different years. Some yellowed, others crisp. None of them opened. I felt something in my stomach twist the way it does when you miss a step on the stairs in the dark. I picked up the first. Dear Lauren, happy 8th birthday. I don't know if you remember my voice. Maybe your mother told you I died. Maybe she didn't say anything at all. But I'm still here. Still hoping. Still writing. Just in case. Love, Dad. I froze. I opened another. I heard you started high school this year. I wish I could have been there for your first day. Your mother doesn't reply to my letters. I don't know if you're okay, but I hope you are. Letter after letter. Year after year. Every milestone of my life was there. Tracked, marked, remembered, by a man I thought was dead. Except I had never seen them. I felt like I was going to throw up. I stared at the envelope in my hand. The return address was Seattle. I had never lived in Seattle, but my real father had. The man my mother told me had died in a car crash when I was 6. I carried the box downstairs like it weighed 100 pounds. My hands trembled. Richard was in the kitchen, cleaning a mug, a routine he did with such mechanical precision it could have been part of a daily broadcast. I dropped the box on the counter. "What's this?" I asked. He turned, and the look on his face changed everything. Not confusion, not surprise, but quiet recognition. "I thought I got rid of those," he said softly, the words falling out like he wasn't ready for them either. I didn't blink. "You knew." He didn't answer. I opened one of the letters, held it up like evidence. "You read them?" He closed his eyes for a second that lasted too long. "Just a few," he admitted. "Why?" Still no answer. "Why didn't you tell me he was alive?" He sat down. Slow, like the weight finally caught up. "Because I was afraid you'd leave too." And there it was. Not malice, not spite, but fear, the kind that eats quietly over time, the kind that justifies cruelty by calling it love. The silence after a truth like that doesn't come quickly. It doesn't settle like dust, doesn't evaporate like steam from a mug. It lingers, heavy and saturated, until even breathing starts to feel like betrayal. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my childhood bedroom, staring at the edges of the letter I'd just unfolded, trying to understand how it could have existed all these years without ever finding me. I kept reading the same sentence over and over, still hoping, still writing, until the words stopped being words and turned into something else entirely. Regret, maybe, or grief, or a truth I hadn't wanted but suddenly couldn't ignore. By morning, I had already made the decision. I was going to find him, my real father. Not because I needed him to replace Richard, not because I wanted some storybook reunion, but because I couldn't go another day knowing that someone had been reaching for me while I stood still in the dark. I didn't tell Richard the first was leaving. I packed light. A small carry-on, the box of letters, a jacket. I left a note. I need to understand for myself. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't meant to hurt. But I didn't say goodbye. I didn't hug him. I didn't offer any reassurances. Because I didn't have any to give. The flight to Seattle was quiet. I didn't listen to music. I didn't open my laptop. I just stared out the window, letting the clouds roll past like slow-moving confessions. I had no idea what I was going to say. I had no plan. I only had an address from the most recent envelope, a small town north of the city, tucked into a zip code I'd never heard of. I rented a car, took the highway with my hands clenched too tightly on the steering wheel. His house wasn't what I expected. A modest one-story, clean lawn, weathered siding, wind chimes hanging from the porch. The kind of place where time moves slower, where neighbors wave when they pass, where secrets go to grow old and quiet. I sat in the car for almost 20 minutes before I got out. I walked to the door, knocked twice. I could hear footsteps. Then the door opened. He looked older, of course. More lines around his eyes, hair graying at the temples, shoulders slightly slumped. But there was something familiar in the way he stood, the way he blinked, like a rhythm I used to know in another life. "Hi," I said. He froze. And then his eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Recognition. Fear. Hope. All tangled together. "Lauren," he said. Not like a question. Like a prayer. I nodded. And for a long moment we didn't move. Then he stepped aside. "Come in," he said. The living room was simple. Quiet colors. Bookshelves. A worn couch. Photos I didn't recognize, fishing trips, graduation caps. A woman I assumed had once loved him. We sat. I held the box in my lap. He looked at it. And then, softly, "She said you'd never want to know me." I swallowed. "She told me you died." He closed his eyes. "I never stopped writing. I didn't know if they reached you. I hoped. They didn't." He nodded. "Until now. We didn't cry. We didn't scream. We just sat there. Two strangers who shared a history neither of us remembered fully. And over the next hour, he told me everything. How he and my mother split. How she left without warning. How every birthday he sent a card. How he kept every rejection letter from the lawyers. Every attempt to get visitation. How he waited. I always thought, maybe when you turned 18, you'd find me," he said. "I didn't even know you were real," I said. "I know." And then the hardest part, when he asked me how Richard was. I hesitated. "He raised me," I said. "He never left." He nodded slowly. "He sounds like a good man." "He is," I said. "And also, he lied." He looked at me. Sometimes the worst lies are told with love. And for the first time, I understood. Both of them had failed me, and both of them had loved me in their own broken ways. I stayed one night. We didn't try to pretend we could rebuild everything. But we did eat dinner together. We looked through old photos. He showed me a picture of me at age 5 that he'd kept in his wallet, creased and faded, edges torn. "I used to take it out every Sunday," he said. "Just to remind myself you were real." I didn't know what to say. So I reached across the table, took his hand. And he held on like it was the only thing anchoring him to the moment. When I returned to California, the house was quiet. Boxes were still open. Richard was in the backyard, pruning the lemon tree. He didn't turn when I stepped outside. I stood by the doorway. "You were right," I said. He waited. He nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not just for hiding it, but for being too afraid to lose you." I stepped closer. "You almost did." Silence. Then he looked up. "I'd do anything to take it back." "I know," I said. "But we don't get to rewrite the story. We just decide what the next chapter looks like." He swallowed hard. Then, quietly, "Will I be in it?" I looked at the lemon tree. The branches. The sunlight. "You already are." And we didn't say more. We didn't need to. That night, I unpacked the box. I read every letter. Some of them twice. Then I placed them into a new binder. Chronologically. Like a history I was reclaiming, one page at a time. I didn't forgive everyone. Not yet. But I understood them. And maybe that's where healing starts, not in the apology, but in the recognition that pain doesn't always come from hate. Sometimes it comes from love that didn't know how to do better.